6 times the scale, usually in plaster, but there are other medium that were also used. Here are some other things from Power of the Force. These are the more you know about the vintage line, the more this will be kind of interesting to you. These are handmade mock-up carded samples of characters they actually never released on Power of the Force cards. So they put action figures on these cards. They're actually using proof cards to do this for catalog photography. One interesting kind of connection that shows you how this kind of world is all connected. So these came from Kim Simmons, who had photographed a lot of the old toys for the Kenner line in the vintage days, and his son Scott Simmons is actually one of the artists that worked on the cereal boxes we have for that we're giving away as part of these panels. So it shows you how interconnected stuff is. But anyway, Kim had saved these samples over the years. Each one is presumably one of a kind, and these were the actual samples used in the Toy Fair catalogs. And so collectors of the carded figure line go after this kind of thing because they're like, wow, I never saw Greedo on a Power of the Force card. So these are the only mock-ups, or among the very few mock-ups that have surfaced.
It's interesting to see which figures were released, which ones were they getting ready to release. Well, why didn't you have a Bosk on a Power of the Force? Well, obviously they were getting ready to do it, but just that kind of thing. Obviously there should have been an original Lando on a Power of the Force. Where was he? Well, he was getting ready to go, but it just at the time had to be canceled.
And then also for Power of the Force, Kenner had planned to release the A-Wing vehicle originally for that line, but because the Power of the Force line was dying off, they ended up releasing the A-Wing for the Droids line, which lasted a little bit longer. And so this is an early proof sheet of the A-Wing in a Power of the Force box.
Even though it's called a proof sheet, it's actually technically not used to proof, but it is a stage of the box production.
Then here's the Droids lightsaber in a mocked-up box, without the colors filled in and so on. And you can see it was originally intended for the Power of the Force line because it has the Power of the Force logo before they updated it for Droids.
A lot of the stuff at this time, you'll see kind of this interaction between the Ewoks brand, the Droids brand, and the Power of the Force, and things that they'll initially think, oh, let's put this out as a Droids item, ends up as a Power of the Force item, vice versa, and all around.
And then same here, like they took the blaster from, this is one where actually they took it from earlier lines, but they had a Stormtrooper blaster from A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, and so they were going to do it for Power of the Force. They painted a little bit different, a slightly grayish kind of tone to it, and they actually had a cutout for the Power of the Force logos that they altered the mold a little bit to have a place to put the sticker, but it was a mocked-up rifle for Power of the Force.
In addition to all the stuff that Kenner did, some of the countries around the world also had Kenner sublicense. So Glaslite from Brazil is one of those sublicenses. This one was kind of interesting because this actually appeared 2 or 3 years after the line had died in the United States. So Star Wars was essentially a dead product here in the United States, but yet these Power of the Force cards show up, and Droids also in Brazil. And so one of the interesting things about this card artwork is instead of having a unique card for each character, you had the same card with just a little sticker to say who the character was for each one. And then this is similar to the store display that we saw earlier, where you have the transparencies to make the figures from each of the primary colors in black.
And then these are some of my favorite ones. Kenner would occasionally kit bash, where they would take like existing toys and then model parts and other toy lines, and come up with ideas to see how could they reuse some of the tooling, but then do a new toy concept. And I love that Leia with the rocket-mounted backpack. It's just such overkill with like how much firepower can we give Leia, and then they were going to do an electronic R2 with like sound effects and so on. These were just some ideas one-off ideas that they played around with. Then, we mentioned the Power of the Force line had a bunch of things that, got canceled. And Droids and the Ewoks line, similarly, this was the C-3PO case. What they had done was the Return of the Jedi C-3PO case, they had decided to make it in the cartoon style, which is kind of the yellow tone that 3PO has, and they even mocked up a box to sell it for the Droids line. It was never sold under the Droids line, but a few samples of that were made.
So, in addition to the first series of action figures for the Droids and the Ewoks cartoon series were very underwhelming and did not sell very well. So that was the death knell for basically the Star Wars line at that point. But they had a whole second series of each that were planned, had various stages of pre-production. Hard copies and first shots of all of these exist, so they were even some carded samples. So they were, really getting close to releasing this second series, but they did not. And so suddenly, now today, these are some of the most popular Star Wars prototypes, mostly from people that have never seen the Droids or Ewoks cartoon series, but they really like the rarity of them, the colorfulness of them, the scarcity of them, obviously.
And then they also made some carded samples of a few of the unproduced Droids and Ewoks characters. Here are two of the Ewoks characters, Chief Chirpa and Poplu. And so they made a few samples of these of what they would look like. They have different card backs, their own. Well, in this case, they just used a V-wing pilot coin, but they would plan to come up with their own unique coin as well.
You don't think Chief Chirpa and Poplu were really V-wing pilots?
Yeah. Well, I know that in the Rogue Squadron novels, they had an Ewok pilot. I thought at one point.
So it is canon now that both Chief Chirpa and Poplu were V-wing pilots. You've heard it here first, guys.
And then, from the Droids line as well, this is Kleb Zelok. There was an unproduced character from the Droids line. And in this case, he actually has this correct coin, because Kleb Zelok wasn't a B-wing pilot.
Wasn't he a Devo?
He was, yes. It was the 80s. And then they had this concept very late in the Droids line. They were going to do companion droids. So to really sell the Droids figures, they were going to have these unposable small droids that came with the posable action figures. And for Jessica Meade, they were going to have this like treadmill type droid. This is a wood pattern for it, so it's done at a slightly larger scale. But it was going to be the companion droid for Jessica Meade.
And we talked earlier about, some of the more things with straighter edges, they'll pattern out of wood instead of doing a wax or something like this, and this is a good example of that. I think that with all these really cool things, it would be nice if somebody were to make a book about all of this.
Well, what do you know?
Hey, that's cool.
No, so we couldn't do this talk without plugging our book. So we just, actually today is the first day it's been available for sale in public. But Duncan and I wrote a book on Star Wars prototypes that we have available down in the exhibit hall floor in booth 125 if you want to buy a copy. But we premiered it here at Star Wars Celebration. And it has some really brilliant, I want to also shout out to Matthias Rendell, who did brilliant graphic design.
Fantastic work, yes, absolutely.
So he did a great job. He did it in a style of like a Kenner designer style. So if you get a chance to look at the book, flip through it. My favorite item that he did, he arranged with a friend of his, was he had a friend photograph his kid like being shot in the eye by a rocket firing Boba Fett.
So you can see some of the posters on the sides of the doors there also. Very well done.
So with that, we have a few minutes for questions, so we'll take some questions.
The Luke that you showed earlier with the robes, I noticed he was in the same color as like the Blue Harvest figures. Now, was that a Blue Harvest figure, or is it they started using different pigments later on?
So the question was the Luke in the robes, was that a Blue Harvest figure because it appeared to be a similar color, or was it something else? And basically the color doesn't come across great in the slideshow, but it actually is a gray primer. So underneath that is a green Dynacast color, the green pigment in the urethane hard copy. And then they painted gray primer on it because presumably they were going to paint that up in the final color. So it's actually a gray color even though it doesn't come across that way when we project it.
Yes?
I'm surprised to see how early they were able to start with things like Return of the Jedi. You know if they were just giving pictures and say make it bigger this, or if they actually had script detail?
Yeah, great question. The question was about did they have script detail or pictures to start on Return of the Jedi line before the movie came out? And actually, something we didn't kind of mention in the slideshow, we do mention in our book, we'll show actual photos that Lucasfilm would send photos to Kenner, and what they would occasionally do is they would cross out the characters, they would mark it up and mess it up so that if it did get reproduced, it would be a damaged image. So and they would also know that it was a licensee of the surface. They were very protective of film images before the film came out, but they did make sure Kenner was informed and saw all the different characters enough that they could make toys of them.
Right, they wouldn't give them a lot of plot points or things like that. So I think with the play sets, they would have kept a lot of the design features to later stages. But that's the famous blue snaggletooth problem, was that they got a black and white photo from here to here of snaggletooth, and from that they created a same size as everyone else blue outfit, and turns out he was half the size of everyone else wearing a red outfit. So they had to change that once they actually saw him in color. But what they got originally was not enough detail to make that film accurate character. Way in the very, very back with the Yoda ears. Okay.
Yes, I think the question was about prototypes of other lines, such as the Hallmark ornaments or other Star Wars collectibles. So there are actually prototypes of every type of Star Wars collectible, and a lot of times we focus on the Kenner, the vintage Kenner in particular, because that has a lot of collector interest. But there actually are prototypes of just about every Star Wars line that has ever come out with every licensee. And we have some examples in our collections of some of those items. Like I have some prototypes of food items. I have sculpts of some of the vitamins, the Star Wars vitamins. So there are other examples of prototypes. Hallmark particularly, I don't collect that, so I don't have a lot of visibility of the prototype. Presumably there are prototypes of that line that are out there, but it's not been my specialty.
Yeah, I have not. I have seen them in existence. I have not seen them on the collector market for Hallmark specifically.
I was just wondering if you've seen anything in any old Kenner literature or anything as to why Yak Face was kind of randomly a one-off, the last figure. Because I mean, they had they were planning the Collectel 93 and everything, but you'd think that they'd introduce more than one new figure. Was he delayed for some reason, or I mean, I don't know. It just seems odd that
you would just do the one.
Right.
Yeah, every other release of action figures included more than just one figure, and here with Yak Face, you just have the one figure there at the very end. And I would say it's just because it was at the very end.
Okay, other questions?
All right, well, thank you very much. Okay, what? Yeah. We'll answer your question later. Thank you all very much.